Hi, just putting together more information modules to enable you to get as informed as possible. This one's on Shockloss, which is a really common question that gets asked prior to hair transplants and immediately post-op when you've had a hair transplant. People need to know about Shockloss. It's a really important factor that is a reality with hair restoration. So hopefully this module will help educate you with regards to shock loss. What is shock loss? Well, shock loss is something that can be experienced when transplanting into existing hair, although highly unpredictable. Shock loss occurs when the native hair is weak and isn't strong enough to resist the trauma that's going on around it. More often than not, hair that has gone into shock will grow back after 3 to 4 months after the resting phase. This is called temporary shock loss. Hair that goes into shock that doesn't return is hair that was inevitably on its way out and was weak and wasn't strong enough to return. This is called permanent shock loss. Will I experience shock loss? Increased trauma to a localized area will increase the chances of shock loss. Shock loss is unpredictable and there is no hard and fast rule to avoiding it, especially if you're transplanting into existing native hair. There are risk factors that heighten or lessen someone's risk. Diffuse thinners seem to be more prone to shock loss than receders because the hair in the diffuse area is often less stable than that of a receder. Very often, a lot of the hair in a diffuse area is on its last legs anyway, and in its latter stages of the miniaturization process. Shock loss tends to occur both in the recipient and it can occur in the donor area. It's a normal response to trauma to the scalp, which is surgery. Skilled surgeons will do their best to eliminate shock loss by appropriate placement and planning. Can Propecia help against shock loss? Shock loss is unpredictable, as we've mentioned. However, Propecia, since it strengthens hair that would have otherwise been on their way out, it can ultimately provide a little bit more strength and resistance. Therefore, it can help against shock loss. It is not a definite, but it can help. At the very least, it helps minimize permanent shock loss. Anytime hair is transplanted in between or around existing native hair, there is a risk of temporary shock loss. This is even more common in women, but is almost always temporary. Only follicles that are transected, which doesn't really happen in the skillful hands of a physician, are miniaturizing hairs on their way out anyway, may be permanently shocked. An unfortunate possibility in hair transplantation is the phenomenon known as shock loss. We can try and eliminate it, but it is unpredictable. Keep in mind that the risk of permanent shock loss only exists for native hair that is currently in a weakened state due to the hair miniaturizing, or if the native hair follicles are transected, but this is rare in the hands of a qualified surgeon. This means that this hair would have eventually fallen out and left you bald anyway. Temporary shock may occur due to the scalp trauma, but will return. Shock loss affects native hair, likely to be noticed within the first month of your hair transplant. More evident if you do not actually shave down for your hair transplant, in my experienced opinion. This is why surgeons will recommend that you shave down the recipient area, as it does help avoid against shock loss. The hair may or may not return. This is a risk of surgery. If you can make it to 4 weeks post-op without any shock loss, then it's more than likely you will not have experienced shock loss. Shock loss also has a great deal to do with the skill of the surgeon and the trauma to the scalp. There is a much higher chance of shock loss with increased tension, donor area. You can still get shock loss simply from the surgical trauma induced. Other factors include trauma to underlying vessels and arteries with reduction of blood supply. This is a fact of surgery. Shock loss can occur in both the recipient and donor region. This is a classic strip scar picture showing shock loss. This hair will all return in this area around the pink line within 3 to 4 months. This is due to the interruption of blood supply to the area. You can apply minoxidil to this area, which will actually help speed up the hair's growth in and around it. This is nothing to be too concerned about and is only a short-term inconvenience. Shock loss can also occur via FUE in the donor area, however it's less common. I personally received the worst case of donor shock loss that anybody has ever come across. This is a picture of me on the left with the red box to highlight the area that went into shock. This was from one of my subsequent surgeries and not my last surgery via Dr. Feller where I got repaired. You can see in the picture on the right hand side highlights the area 5-6 months post-op. It all actually regrew. Shock loss can ultimately present an increase in downtime. Just please be aware of shock loss. It is a factor to consider and it also is a factor involved with hair transplant surgery.